Today's lesson is called The Treasure in the Forest. Hello, everyone. My name is Jeff.
I'm Roger, and today we're talking about a featured work of literature by the British author H.G. Wells, and the story is entitled The Treasure in the Forest. This is all about a couple of British guys who were trying to get some treasure, but, they had some troubles in the process.
There you go. Now, H.G. Wells, he was an English writer known for science fiction. In fact, he is known as being one of the first science fiction writers. Very often, he talks about science and how powerful it is and stuff like that. Many of you might know H.G. Wells from The War of the World. Yes, it's H.G. Wells, Herbert George Wells, but yes, he liked to go by H.G. Anyways, that's enough talk for now. Let's go ahead and start reading from our H.G. Wells story called The Treasure in the Forest. We'll be right back with the first part of this story right after this.
The Treasure in the Forest. Armed with nothing but a canoe and a worn yellowed map, Evans and Hooker were on the hunt for buried treasure. Though the two British men were puzzled by some of the map's dots and lines, which they assumed were Chinese characters, they hoped the ragged sheet would lead them to their prize.
大家好，第一部分我们看到的单字是 assume， 这个字是动词，指假定、以为。例如 It's best not to assume anything until you hear Jill's side of the story. 在你听到 Jill 那边的说法之前，最好不要做任何假设。另外 assume 除了上述的意思外，还可以指接下一个职位或担起什么角色。我们可以说 Sarah assumed the role of the parent for her younger siblings while her mother was in the hospital. Sarah 的妈妈住院期间，她担起家长的角色照顾弟妹。接下来我们看到形容词 ragged， 课文中指物品是破烂的或是破旧的。举例来说 Todd had to use a ragged piece of cloth as a temporary bandage until the paramedics arrived. 在救护人员抵达前 Todd 得使用一块破布作为临时绷带使用。另外 ragged 除了上述的意思外，还可以用来形容人衣衫褴褛、邋遢的，所以可以说 A ragged man begged for money in the street. 那个衣衫褴褛的人在街头乞讨。
All right, everybody, it's time for us to discuss the contents of today's lesson. Again, the title of our featured story is The Treasure in the Forest. Of course, treasure is something that is valuable, so these guys head into a forest to try to find some treasure. If you knew there was treasure there in the forest, you'd go looking for that treasure as well. Now, here in the first paragraph, it says, armed with nothing but a canoe and a worn, yellowed map, Evans and Hooker were on the hunt for buried treasure. So armed with here usually refers to a weapon that you might have. The soldier was armed with a rifle, you could say that, but in this particular case, it means they had these things to use as tools, armed with a canoe and a map. But these are the only things they had, so we're saying that they were armed with nothing, or they only had a canoe and a map that was worn and yellowed. A map, of course, tells you where to go. If you're trying to drive to Taichung, for example, you can probably check the map on your phone to make sure you don't get lost. But in this particular case, it's a map that is printed on paper. You may remember maps like that in the past. People actually used maps that were printed on paper. And, after time, paper yellows or it fades. So this is an old map, so it turned yellow and it was worn. It had been used a lot. Maybe some of the colors were worn off or it was ripped in places. And then they also had this canoe.
Yeah, but if you're armed with nothing but a canoe and a map, you're not really armed at all. I think the use of language here is supposed to make it clear that these two people, Evans and Hooker, are vulnerable, okay? They're not armed with anything. Yes, usually you're armed with weapons, okay? You can protect yourself and stuff like that. Here, though, all they have is this canoe and this map, and that's that. If they do need to defend themselves, they're not going to be able to do a very good job with only a canoe and then a map. So yes, these guys are vulnerable. That's the feeling that I get right now. Anyways, more on Evans and Hooker. Yes, they're on the hunt for buried treasure, and though the two British men were puzzled by some of the map's dots and lines, which they assumed were Chinese characters, they hoped the ragged sheet would lead them to their prize. They were hoping that this map, okay, would lead them to this buried treasure. By the way, very often when people do go on treasure hunts, they do so because of a map that they've found. Maybe an old, worn, yellowed map with an X on it. And yes, the X marks the spot where the treasure's supposed to be buried. Anyways, though, yes, these two British guys, they have a map, and they think the map is going to lead them to buried treasure. And yes, even though some of the dots and lines on this map are puzzling, hey, they think they've got it figured out. They're just assuming that these dots and lines represent Chinese characters. Anyways, here, yes, we have the verb assume to talk about. Assume is the verb. Assumption is the noun. Yes, if you assume something, you believe, suppose, or you think that something is true, even though you don't really have good evidence of your claim, or even though you don't really have proof. And yes, to assume something is to make an assumption about that thing. Further, more on this map, they were hoping, Evans and Hooker were hoping that this ragged sheet would lead them to their prize, to this buried treasure. Yes, this is a ragged sheet. It's a ragged map. Yes, here we have the word ragged. The word ragged describes something that is old and worn and torn and maybe even threadbare. For example, the old fisherman wore only a ragged shirt and pair of pants.
Recently I threw out an old jacket. It was quite ragged. I had had it for 20 years, but enough was enough. I had to get rid of it because it was too worn and torn. It was ragged. So here they've got that yellowed map, which we're also describing as a ragged sheet or a ragged map. That's all they got. They're looking for this treasure, and there's some writing on this paper that they assume is Chinese, but they're not really sure. They probably never took Chinese before, and they don't really know what it looks like. So, yeah, I wonder if they're going to be able to find the treasure with this limited information. Let's move on now to the next paragraph, and we're going to listen first.
While Hooker was paddling, Evans nodded off. In his dream, he was transported back to the day he and Hooker had overheard a group of Chinese talking about the treasure. A man named Zhang Hai had discovered a shipwrecked Spanish vessel and hidden the gold ingots he had found within. Then the scene in his dream shifted, and Evans could feel Zhang Hai's ponytail in his hand and see his grinning face as they forced information out of him. The dream changed again. A devil that resembled Zhang Hai fed Evans burning coals, and another devil shouted, "Evans, Evans, you sleepy fool!"
第二部分，我们看到一个动词 overhear， 指无意间听到、偶然听见。动词的三态是 overhear, overheard, overheard。像是 I overheard a really funny joke on the bus today and couldn't help burst out laughing。我在回家的公车上无意间听到一个很好笑的笑话，忍不住开始大笑。又或者说Tina overheard me talking about buying tickets to the concert and asked me to pick one up for her. Tina 偶然听见我说要买演唱会的门票，并且要我也帮她买一张。接着我们看到动词 shipwreck， 指使遭受海难之意。举例来说 We will end up shipwrecked on the island if you don't stay away from those dangerous rocks. 如果你不远离那些危险的石块，我们最后将会在这座岛上遭遇海难。 另外 shipwreck 除了做动词用，还可以当名词，指沉船、船难。所以可以说 The divers explored the shipwreck, hoping to find those who were still lost. 潜水员探索沉船，希望能找到尚在失踪的人。再来，我们看到一个单字 vessel， 这个字为名词，指船舰、大船。像是 Patrick's sailboat is a very large vessel that can carry over 300 people. Patrick 的帆船是可以承载超过300人的大船。
All right, we've got Evans and we've got Hooker. They are trying to find buried treasure. Yes, the name of our story is The Treasure in the Forest, and so far we've been following Evans and Hooker. They are on the hunt for buried treasure in this forest. They've got a map, a ragged, worn, yellowed map. They think that this map is going to lead them to this buried treasure. Now, one thing, remember, they've got this map, and they also have a canoe. Yes, they are going through this forest on a stream or a river in a canoe. And yes, next, our story tells us that while Hooker was paddling, Evans nodded off, i.e. Hooker was doing the paddling here in the canoe, and Evans fell asleep while Hooker was paddling. Okay, he nodded off or fell asleep. Now, here we have the verb paddle to talk about, okay? If you paddle, okay, you move through water in a boat or a canoe using an oar-like thing called a paddle. Yes, you paddle verb with a paddle noun. And yes, a paddle is kind of like an oar, but yes, very simply, a paddle is just that contraption, that device that you use to propel yourself through water. It's not a motor. You have to actually do this manually with your hands and arms and stuff like that. That's how you paddle.
Right. If you're in a rowboat, of course, the oars are attached to the boat, so you row, row, row your boat. But in this particular case, they are in a canoe, which is kind of long and thin, like they have on Orchid Island there. And you, of course, have to hold the oar or the paddle in your hands. It's not mounted to the boat, so you paddle your canoe. So Hooker was paddling, and then Evans was kind of tired, so he nodded off. He just kind of started to fall asleep there, and he started to have a dream. So in his dream, he was transported back to the day he and Hooker had overheard a group of Chinese talking about the treasure. So I guess these Chinese people were speaking in English or something, or maybe Hooker and Evans know Chinese. We don't quite know, but they overheard these Chinese people talking about this treasure. So if you overhear someone, that's the verb here, overhear, that means you hear something, but you weren't really supposed to be listening, or they weren't really talking to you. You can overhear people talking if you're in a restaurant, for example. If you kind of listen to the people at the next table, you can overhear them. That's different from eavesdropping. To eavesdrop means you're listening on purpose. You want to know what they're talking about, but you don't let them know that you're listening.
Yeah, maybe Hooker and Evans aren't bad guys or spies. They just overheard a conversation. Yes, if you overhear something, like a conversation, you kind of listen into that conversation secretly or without the knowledge or consent of the people who are talking. And yes, like Roger said, overhearing a conversation is kind of like eavesdropping, but there's a big difference between these two things, okay? Sometimes you can overhear a conversation without meaning to hear that conversation. If you are eavesdropping, though, you are spying. You're intentionally trying to hear a conversation that you are not a part of. Anyways, before we move on, let's take a look at an example sentence for the verb overhear. Oh, I'm sorry, but I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. Anyways, the next sentence says, a man named Chang Hai had discovered a shipwrecked Spanish vessel and hidden the gold ingots he had found within. So there you go. There is the treasure. So Evans and Hooker, they're overhearing this conversation. Apparently, a person discovered a shipwrecked Spanish vessel, and then after finding this vessel, they took the gold out of it and they had hidden it. They had buried it somewhere. That's the buried treasure. How about that? But before we move on, we've got a lot to talk about. Apparently this person, Chang Hai, had discovered a shipwrecked Spanish vessel.
That's right. If it's shipwrecked, of course, it's wrecked. It probably sank in the ocean, or maybe it washed up on some rocks somewhere. So Chang Hai had discovered this ship. It was actually from Spain, and so sometimes we describe ships on the ocean as being vessels. Or maybe spaceships could also be called vessels, just some kind of ship, basically. And inside that shipwrecked Spanish vessel were some hidden gold ingots. An ingot is basically a piece of metal in a certain shape, maybe kind of long and round. And of course, this person had found them inside that ship. Then the scene in his dream shifted. It changed. That happens in dreams sometimes. You go to different places. And Evans could feel Chang Hai's ponytail in his hand and see his grinning face as they forced information out of him. Now, as you know, during the Qing dynasty, lots of men had ponytails, or sometimes called queues, I believe. And so I guess they had their hair in the traditional style back then. So he could feel the ponytail in his hand. That's just hair that's tied up in the back of your head and often braided.
Oh, wow. And this sounds violent. Okay, so Evans is holding Chang Hai's ponytail in his hand. He's seeing himself grinning as he, Evans, and then also Hooker forced information out of Chang Hai. So remember, Chang Hai is the person who discovered this treasure. So they overheard other people talking about this, and later they tracked down Chang Hai and they tried to force the information about this buried treasure out of him. They used force to do so.
Absolutely, but then the dream changed again. A devil that resembled Chang Hai fed Evans burning coals. Oh, that doesn't sound good. Of course, coal is black stuff from the ground that you can burn to have a barbecue or to create energy. And this person was feeding it to him, forcing him to eat that. That would have been very uncomfortable. And then another devil shouted, another evil spirit said, Evans, Evans, you sleepy fool. Gee, why would an evil spirit say something like that?
I don't think it's the evil spirit. I think in this dream that Evans is hearing things and associating what he's hearing with the devils in this part of his dream. I think it's actually Hooker talking to him, and later on we'll find out that this is in fact the case. Anyways, folks, with that, it is time for us to take a short break, but don't go away. When we come back, we'll be wrapping up the first part of our lesson called The Treasure in the Forest.
It was actually Hooker waking him up because they had reached the mouth of the lagoon. The pair left the canoe and continued on foot. After a while, Evans suddenly spotted something blue among the foliage. "What the devil's that?" he exclaimed. When they got closer, they realized it was the puffed-up body of a dead Chinese man.
"第三部分我们看到名词 lagoon 指西湖。例如 The children played in the calm water of the lagoon. 孩童在平静的西湖玩水。最后我们看到单字 foliage 这个字为名词，用来指树叶、枝叶。举例来说 This old-growth forest is thick with foliage. 这片原始森林树叶浓密。
Okay, now remember, Evans has dozed off in the canoe, and he's having a dream about these different things. And then in the end there, an evil spirit says, Evans, Evans, you sleepy fool. Well, it was actually Hooker waking him up because they had reached the mouth of the lagoon. Okay, so of course, as you know, a river has a mouth and a source. For example, the Mississippi River in the United States, its mouth is down in Louisiana and its source is up in Minnesota somewhere. But in this particular case, a lagoon is a body of water that's kind of inside an island, but it's connected to the ocean. So when you're in the ocean and you're about to enter that lagoon, you you are at the mouth of that lagoon.
There you go. Anyways, the pair left the canoe and continued on foot. So maybe on the map it said, okay, you have to reach the mouth of the lagoon and then you have to walk. Okay, so yes, the pair, Hooker and Evans, they left the canoe and they continued on foot. They started to walk. Okay, now after a while, Evans suddenly spotted something blue among the foliage. "What the devil's that?" he exclaimed.
Yep, he saw that in the plants or the foliage. What the heck is that? And when they got closer, they realized it was the puffed up body of a dead Chinese man. Ooh, that does not sound good here. So they approached this thing, and it turned out to be a body that was puffed up. When somebody dies, of course, I guess they kind of swell up. And in this particular case, it puffed up, maybe because of some kind of chemical reaction or something like that. We don't quite know right now, but don't worry, we'll continue talking about this story in our next program. But right now, we're going to listen again to our Chinese teacher.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文一开始提到 Armed with nothing but a canoe and a worn yellowed map, Evans and Hooker were on the hunt for buried treasure. 好，那这边要介绍3个文法重点。第一个是句子里面这个 worn， 它是 wear 的过去分词。那么 worn 当形容词可以用来描述经过磨损而破旧的。好，那我们顺便补充一下一个片语叫做 wear out。wear out 它有用坏或者是耗损殆尽的意思。如果用在人的身上，那就表示你的身体这个力气被耗尽了嘛，表示精疲力竭。那我们也可以用 worn out W-O-R-N 连字号O-U-T 来形容这个东西呢，它是用坏的，不能再用的。那用来形容人，就是说这个人他是精疲力竭的，非常疲累的，意思就会跟 exhausted 差不多。那我们来造一个例句。Kim felt worn out after a long day at work. Kim 工作一整天结束之后，他觉得累坏了。好，第二个重点是 be armed with something， 这表示说具备什么，配有什么，装备着什么什么。像是 armed with cameras and tripods, the photographers headed to the top of the hill. 那些摄影师配备了相机和脚架，朝着山顶前进。好，那么第3个重点是 nothing but，它是用来表达只有什么，或者是只不过是什么。Nothing but 的后面可以接人或是事物。举例来说 There's nothing but an empty bottle in the box， 意思就是说这个箱子里面只有一个空瓶子。好，那我们来回头看课文哦。课文的这个句子它没有连接词，而是以过去分词 armed 开头，那就表示这个前半句它是分词构句。Armed with nothing but 什么什么，表示只配备了什么什么。这个 armed 它就是由 Evans and Hooker were armed 省略而来，它省略相同的主词 Evans and Hooker， 还有省略 be 动词，然后只留下过去分词 armed。 好，我们接着读到课文第2部分的第2句，他说In his dream, he was transported back to the day he and Hooker had overheard a group of Chinese talking about the treasure. 在梦里，他被带回到他和 Hooker 无意间听到一群中国人谈论宝藏的那一天。好，句子里面有一个动词叫 overhear。Overhear 它表示无意中听到，意外的偷听到。那它的动词3态是 overhear, overheard, overheard。好，那它的用法呢，常见有2种，就是用 overhear 加受词加原形动词，或者是用 overhear 加受词加现在分词。好，当这个受词补语是原形动词的时候，就表示说你有偷听到完整的内容。那如果受词补语是用现在分词，就表示是听到当下片段的内容。举例来说 Mia overheard her parents talking about selling their car. Mia 无意中听到她爸妈在谈论卖车的事，她并不是从头听到尾，而是可能从中听到片段。好，那顺便补充一下，如果你想要表达窃听、暗中的偷听，我们则是用 eavesdrop 这个字 E-A-V-E-S-D-R-O-P eavesdrop。 举例来说 Mrs. Robinson was eavesdropping on the conversation between her son and his girlfriend. 罗宾森太太在偷听他儿子跟女朋友的对话。 好，以上是今天的重点整理，我们回顾今天的单字吧。
Assume. Everyone assumed Irene would get into her first choice school because her grades were so high. Ragged. If stores won't accept a ragged bill, you should take it to the bank and change it for a new one. Paddle. Ronald paddled the boat to a small island in the middle of the river. Overhear. Even with the door shut, I could still overhear the conversation going on in the other room. Shipwreck. The boat was shipwrecked in the storm and many sailors were lost at sea. Vessel. The United States Navy commands nearly 500 vessels in total.
Okay, everyone. With that, today's article is now complete. But, as always, we sure hope that you guys have enjoyed reading along with us. Anyways, I'm Jeff.
I am Roger.
See you next time.